On a quiet street in South Dallas, a police sergeant publicly humiliated a well-dressed black man, assuming he was suspicious. Sergeant Brody, known for his harsh tactics, had no idea the man he shoved against the hood was about to become the city's new chief of police. Marcus West didn't retaliate. He waited, then changed everything with one powerful move. But just wait until you see how this story twists, and why, in the end, justice finally won. The heat that morning sat heavy in the air like a wool blanket soaked in sunlight. The pavement shimmered with rising waves, and even the shade seemed to retreat under the relentless Texas sky. South Dallas moved in its usual rhythm. Kids kicking cans near cracked sidewalks, the soft rumble of passing buses, corner vendors wiping sweat from their foreheads. But at the intersection of 12th Street and Maple Drive, something stood out. A black Cadillac Escalade, spotless and gleaming, idled quietly at the curb, its tinted windows reflecting a neighborhood that rarely saw such polished steel. The door opened with a muffled click, and out stepped a tall man in a navy blue tailored suit. He had the kind of presence that made people glance twice: upright posture, calm eyes, and the subtle gravity of someone who knew exactly who he was. His name was Marcus West. Officially, Marcus wasn't due to assume his position as the new chief of police until Monday. Unofficially, he had already arrived, quietly, discreetly, and deliberately without announcement. He believed you couldn't lead a city unless you first listened to its heartbeat. And you couldn't hear that heartbeat from behind a desk or under a press spotlight. You had to stand on the sidewalk, watch, feel. As Marcus stepped away from the SUV, he pulled out his phone to take a call. His voice was low, even. The man on the other end, his incoming operations advisor, spoke in clipped tones about transition meetings and media prep. Marcus nodded but barely heard him. His eyes scanned the street, catching the flicker of routine life. A mother herding two tired kids past a payday loan store, a teen hopping off his bike to buy a soda, a weathered old man selling roasted corn under a faded umbrella. Then came the screech of tires on cracked asphalt. A patrol car, white Dodge Charger, mud-streaked and dented, pulled sharply into view and came to a stop just a few feet from where Marcus stood. The door swung open. Out stepped a man who moved like he owned every inch of the block. White, mid-50s, buzz-cut, broad chest straining his uniform shirt. The kind of cop with a gut full of authority and a badge that's been in rotation longer than most rookies' careers. His name was Sergeant Clay Brody, a longtime patrolman with a reputation for being old school, the kind who'd made up his mind about a man before he even opened his mouth. Brody's eyes locked on Marcus, a black man, standing in a clean suit, next to a luxury vehicle. To Brody, that checked enough boxes. He stepped forward, lips tightening. "What are you doing here?" he barked. Not asked, barked. Like the sidewalk had rules Marcus had broken simply by existing on it. Marcus turned slightly, unfazed. "Just taking a call, officer." "Is there a problem?" Brody's tone hardened. "We've had complaints about suspicious activity. You matched the description." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "What description would that be?" Brody didn't answer. He just stepped closer and extended his hand. "ID. Now." "I have it," Marcus replied calmly. "But I haven't been told why I'm being stopped." Brody scoffed. "You ask a lot of questions." In the next moment, before anyone could process, Brody grabbed Marcus's wrist and spun him toward the Cadillac. With a practiced motion, he patted him down, forcing Marcus's chest against the burning metal hood. The suit crumpled. The phone clattered to the ground. People began to gather. Phones came out. The air changed, filled with that familiar electricity that arrives right before something goes very wrong. An older man across the street, Lewis Henderson, a retired mechanic who'd lived on that block for 40 years, shouted, "Hey, he didn't do nothing." Brody didn't flinch. "Back off, old man, unless you want obstruction charges." Marcus said nothing. No protest. No resistance. Only silence. The kind that held everything inside, storing it away with precision. He memorized the officer's face, every wrinkle, every twitch. But his dignity, though bent, did not break. At that moment, the viewer feels it, raw, pulsing anger. Not because the scene is unfamiliar, but because it's too familiar. Because what just happened wasn't loud, it wasn't bloody, but it was unjust, humiliating, and all too real. Marcus didn't file a complaint. He didn't make a scene. He didn't tweet. He didn't call in favors or go to the press. He waited, because some truths speak louder when delivered at the right time and from the right podium. When Monday morning came, the city government building was humming with tension. Officers in uniform stood shoulder to shoulder in the council chamber. Lieutenants, detectives, district commanders, and sergeants, including one who stood toward the back with his arms crossed and jaw tight, Sergeant Clay Brody. He hadn't slept well. Word was the mayor had found someone new. An outsider, they said. Some federal type. Brody didn't like that. He didn't like change. He didn't like people parachuting in and pretending to understand his city. The murmurs quieted when the mayor entered, flanked by advisors, camera crews trailing behind. She stepped to the podium, cleared her throat, and smiled thinly. Thank you all for being here. Today marks a turning point for this department, and for Dallas. She let the pause settle. Please join me in welcoming our new chief of police, Marcus West. The room didn't erupt. It froze. First, a flicker of confusion. Then, collective silence, like a pin had dropped inside a pressure chamber. Heads turned, and then Clay Brody saw him, walking out from the side curtain. Calm, measured, the same man he'd shoved against a car hood just 3 days ago. Marcus was no longer in a tailored suit. He was in uniform now, the deep navy blues of command, polished badge on his chest, black tie crisp against the collar. He didn't smile. He didn't gloat. But he looked directly at Brody. For the first time in years, the sergeant felt something unfamiliar tightening in his chest. Marcus stepped up to the podium. He didn't unfold a speech. He didn't look at notes. His voice, when it came, was level, but there was iron behind the words. Last week I was publicly humiliated by a member of this department, not as an officer, as a man. I was treated like a threat because of how I looked, not because of what I did. The silence thickened. I came to Dallas to restore trust between law enforcement and the people we serve. But after what I experienced, I realized that trust isn't broken. It's been shattered. And some of the people who shattered it are standing in this room. His eyes moved slowly, scanning the faces. Many looked down. Some stared straight ahead, unmoving. And then his gaze stopped. On Clay Brody. A beat passed. Change begins today. That was all. He stepped away from the mic. No applause followed. Just a long, heavy pause, like everyone in the room had been forced to hold their breath. And somewhere, behind the cold shock of that moment, something else began to stir in the viewers' hearts. Pain, at how familiar this was, how many times it had gone unpunished. But also hope, because this time, the man holding the wheel had felt it himself. The chief's office smelled of fresh paint and new resolve. Marcus sat behind the wide oak desk, a steaming coffee untouched in front of him. Across from him sat the Internal Affairs Committee, 5 seasoned investigators with laptops and notepads open, brows furrowed. Marcus didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. I want a full review of every incident involving Sergeant Brody in the last 5 years. Not summaries, not excuses, reports, body cam footage, complaints, even the ones that were dismissed. One of the committee members nodded slowly. They understood. The era of turning a blind eye was over. And not just him, Marcus continued. Anyone with a pattern of excessive stops, force complaints, or community mistrust. This department's job is to protect people, not profile them. By Friday, the first resignations had quietly begun. A captain with too many sealed files. A sergeant whose numbers didn't match his testimonies. Clay Brody, placed on administrative leave, pending investigation. The press began to pick up the shifts. Community leaders started returning calls. And on the streets of South Dallas, people, even the ones who didn't trust uniforms, began to say the words out loud. Maybe this guy's different. Maybe we finally got someone who gets it. Maybe now things'll change. It wasn't a revolution, not yet, but it was the first crack in a long, silent wall, and it started with a man who refused to respond with revenge and chose leadership instead. A month had passed, and in South Dallas, something had changed, not loudly, but unmistakably. Officers now wore active body cameras. Every stop was done by the book. Twice that month, violations were caught and swiftly acted upon. No delays, no excuses. But the real shift wasn't in policy. It was in presence. Marcus West, now fully in office, spent every Friday walking the neighborhoods. No uniform, no entourage, just a man in plain clothes, stopping to listen. He sat on porch steps. He greeted teens outside gas stations. He asked simple questions like, "How are things today?" and waited for real answers. Even those who once looked away when a patrol car passed now met his eyes. Some nodded. Some called him Chief with cautious respect, because he didn't come to lecture. He came to rebuild. Brody's fall, quiet but firm. As for Sergeant Clay Brody, terminated, not quietly, not reassigned, formally removed, investigated for misconduct, abuse of power, and racial bias. He claimed he was just doing his job, but Dallas had seen the footage, and this time, no one looked away. The message that echoed. A short clip from a local community event went viral. Marcus stood before a crowd, no stage lights, just a folding mic stand, and said, "Being a police officer isn't about being the strongest person in the room. It's about being the fairest. If you can't tell the difference between someone's skin color and a crime, you don't belong here." No dramatic music, no cheers, just stillness, and then quiet nods, the kind that meant, finally, someone said it. Closing emotion, triumph and inspiration. Marcus didn't seek revenge. He sought reform and delivered it. He had been humiliated on the street, but he didn't retaliate. He rewrote the street, and in doing so, he gave a city something it hadn't felt in years, a reason to believe again.